This morning, our speaker has asked that we read together from Psalm 37. Psalm number 37. Reading verses 23 through 40. If the Lord delights in a man's way, he makes his steps firm. Though he stumble, he will not fall, for the Lord upholds him with his hand. I was young, and now I am old, yet I have never seen the righteous forsaken, or their children begging bread. They are always generous and lend freely. Their children will be blessed. Turn from evil and do good, then you will dwell in the land forever. For the Lord loves the just and will not forsake his faithful ones. They will be protected forever, but the offspring of the wicked will be cut off. The righteous will inherit the land and dwell in it forever. The mouth of the righteous man utters wisdom, and his tongue speaks from what is just. The law of his God is in his heart. His feet do not slip. The wicked lie in wait for the righteous, seeking their very lives. But the Lord will not leave them in their power, or let them be condemned when brought to trial. Wait for the Lord, and keep his way. He will exalt you to inherit the land. When the wicked are cut off, you will see it. I have seen a wicked and ruthless man flourishing like a green tree in its native soil. But soon he passed away and was no more. Though I looked for him, he could not be found. Consider the blameless. Observe the upright. There is a future for the man of peace. But all sinners will be destroyed. The future of the wicked will be cut off. The salvation of the righteous comes from the Lord. He is their stronghold in time of trouble. The Lord helps them and delivers them. He delivers them from the wicked and saves them because they take refuge in him. We've read from Psalm 37 to prepare for this morning's exhortation titled Reflections of David, to be presented by our brother Trent Johnson. Brother Trent?
All right. That's what I need, some encouragement. Thanks, Steve. How was it downtown, by the way, Glenn? Was it... Oh, did you? Well, that's good. All right. So Psalm 37 is written by an old David. And I was thinking about one of my favorite stories, and that's what I'm going to talk about today, and that's David and Goliath. And I was wondering about if David ever brings it up in any of his writings, like he thinks back on days past and talks about, how he slew the mighty giant when he was young. And it doesn't seem like he really does. The only thing I could find in this passage, and this depends on what version you read, is verse 37 in the Revised Standard Version, or verse 35, in chapter 37, which in the Revised Standard it says, I have seen a wicked man overbearing and towering like a cedar of Lebanon. Again I passed by, and lo, he was no more. Though I sought him, he could not be found. So that might be a passage where he reflects on his the destruction of Goliath. But really, if it is, it's pretty general here. And the whole chapter, when he's going back, I was just thinking, what would I do? I'd be telling my grandkids about it, I'm sure, and my kids, and maybe he did, who knows. But I think as we go back through the story, there might be some reasons that he wouldn't, that he would not consider himself that important in the story, which seems odd, but it could be the case. So I also want you to think about your own lives, and especially the ones that are older, the things that you reflect on in your life, whether you think about all the good things you've done, or do you dwell on the bad things that have happened in your life. What kind of things do you think about as you reflect on your own life? So the story of David and Goliath, as I said, I'm fascinated by that story, and it always seems like a great story, and you think of it differently from when you were a kid, at least I do, as to when you get older. And you think of different things that are remarkable about the whole story. We used to have a life-size poster. I think we brought it in before, Sue and I, that we made of Goliath, and he's a big guy. Like, if the measurements are correct, he's about 9 feet tall. So just get that in your head. And I think when we hung it up here, it would go from ceiling to floor. So that's how big Goliath was. But the story actually starts a little earlier. At least I'm going to start earlier. And it's the story of Israel trying to make themselves into a viable nation, that they are battling with various small nations in the area, and one of them is the Philistines. And they've had some success, right, prior to David fighting Goliath. And you can see that in 1 Samuel 14. This is Israel trying to, once again, establish themselves, and they don't really have an army yet, but they're trying to get one together and get weapons, as you can read in some of these passages. We're not going to go into it, but they don't really have a cache of weapons. They don't have swords and spears, things like that. They're trying to use their tools as weapons. Nobody really has a sword except the king and his sons, it appears. But in this little battle, and it isn't it's kind of a flare-up where Israel is rebelling and trying to get out from under the rule of the Philistines. And Jonathan decides one day that he knows there's a garrison of Philistines not far away, so he decides to go over there. And he goes with his armor bearer, and like I said, he's equipped to actually fight. And he has a plan that he says, I'll go up and fight this garrison if I call up, and he's at the bottom of a mountain. He says, if I call up there and they say, come up and fight us, then I'll go up and fight them. And that was his simple plan for seeing if the Lord would be with him. And so he does it. And yes, he goes up the hill, and somehow, certainly with God's help, he's able to put the whole Philistines in an uproar. And the nation of Israel sees this. They said, "What's all the commotion?" And then they say, "It looks like the Philistines are on the run," so they all chase after them. And they have a pretty good, successful battle with them. In 1 Samuel 14, verse 13, it says, "Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet, and his armor-bearer after him, and they fell before Jonathan, and his armor-bearer killed them after him." And that first slaughter which Jonathan and his armor-bearer made was of about 20 men, within, as it were, half a furrow's length and an acre of land. There was a panic in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. The garrison and even the raiders trembled. The earth quaked, and it became a very great panic. So this little thing that Jonathan decided to do worked out pretty well, but there was a bad part to it, and that was that his father had made the people swear an oath that they would not eat anything until this whole battle was over. And Jonathan did eat something. So they were worried about what they should do with him, and Saul decided, well, he broke the oath, even though he didn't know there was an oath, so he should die for that. But the people wouldn't let him die. They ransomed him. But it's interesting that it says in verse 31, "They struck down the Philistines that day from Michmash to Aijalon, and the people were very faint. The people flew upon the spoil and took sheep and oxen and calves and slew them on the ground. The people ate them with the blood," and then Saul gets very upset. And they told Saul, "Behold, the people are sinning against the Lord by eating with the blood." And he says, "You have dealt treacherously," and this is when the problem starts. So they had the Philistines on the run, and now it says in verse 36, Saul said, "Let us go down after the Philistines by night and despoil them until the morning light." So they were about to just really crush the Philistines. But then they found out that God wasn't going to be with them, and so they couldn't do it because of this whole turmoil with Jonathan and the people sinning. They were not able to go and finish off the Philistines. It would have been the end of it right there, probably. They would have not seen the Philistines again, at least for a long time. But it didn't quite work out that way. And so we have in chapter 17, the Philistines are back. There's a couple battles in between where they fight against the Amalekites, and now they seem to be a regular army. Israel does. But in chapter 17, here are the Philistines again. It says, "They gathered their army for battle, and they were gathered at Soko, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Soko and Azekah in Ephes-dammim." So here they are, and it says here that they're kind of in a stalemate because the Israelites are on one mountain, on the side of the mountain, and the Philistines are on another mountain on the side, and there's a valley in between. Nobody wants to go into the valley. So they're just staying on the mountains, and you can understand why. They'd be giving up a good position to go into the valley. They don't want arrows rained down upon them from the height. Neither side does. So they're just staying there. looking at each other, across the valley. And so then you have this Philistine, Goliath, comes out. He's a mighty warrior, and he taunts Israel. Now, we don't know if they planned to do this from the start. I kind of doubt it, but it seems that while there's this stalemate, Goliath goes out and says, I might as well taunt these people. So he does, and he invites any Israelite that wants to come and fight him. And we can only imagine what kind of crude language he used or what kind of vicious taunts he said to them. But he was doing this over and over, and I was thinking, giants can, even tall, strong men can be beaten. So maybe the first time Goliath went out, he was a little worried that somebody might come out and fight him. Because, you can look at boxing or any kind of fighting. There are not tall guys in those kind of sports because they can be beaten. But I think once he got out there a few times and saw that nobody was going to challenge him, he was happy to go out there every day and say how great he was and how great their gods were and how he could not be defeated, and mock the Israelites each day. But the Israelites would not go down into the valley no matter, and they had no man that would go down for them. So this goes on for how long? Do you remember? How long does Goliath go out there? It says every day for 40 days. So over a month, he was out there taunting them. And still, they would not budge. Neither side would budge. The Israelites could not be drawn down into the valley, and the Philistines would not go down there. And yet Goliath would come down every day and mock the Israelites. So after 40 days, Jesse decides that he wants to send some supplies to his sons, which he does through David. And it's an interesting thing. I don't know if you ever paid attention to what he sent with them. Well, one of the things he sent were 10 cheeses, it says, and that was for all the commanders of the armies that kind of passed out. So they must have been some huge wheels of cheese that Jesse was sending out there. And he says to David, I want you to go take all these supplies and then tell me how it's going, and come back with some token from the 3 sons that Jesse had involved in the battle that bring back something to show me that they're okay. And so David says, fine, I would be glad to do that. And I'm guessing David would have been excited to go there. He probably wanted to go to the battle in the first place. But he was either too young or too inexperienced, or he needed to take care of the sheep, which, that's what his job was. And Jesse could only spare the 3 sons, the 3 oldest ones, to go to the battle. So I was thinking of that, and I was thinking about how Goliath comes out to taunt them. And it reminded me of Numbers 13, when the spies came back from the land. It says, so they brought to the people of Israel an evil report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seem to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them. And I thought it was interesting, too, that it says at the end of 40 days they returned from spying out the land. And they brought a lot of the goods back from the land after they had spied it out. So we're on kind of the same schedule here. They spent 40 days in the land, and when they were in there, they saw giants. They saw men of great stature, and they said, there's no way we can beat these people. Now here they are back again in the land. They've been in the land for a long time now, and here are these giants again, or at least one. Giant, and after 40 days, David comes to the camp and sees what's going on. And when David gets there, he sees Goliath come out and make his proclamation about how stupid they are and how great he is, and how he, if anybody dares challenge him, he would be glad to accept it. And David watches, and he sees the men of Israel flee as Goliath walks across the valley, shakes his spear at them, and says, who dares challenge me? And everybody backs off and says, not me. It's not going to be me. And David sees that, and he's amazed by it. He says, why doesn't anybody go down there and just kill that guy? He doesn't see a giant down there. He just sees a dead man. He sees somebody that dared to defy the living God. So he doesn't see this guy's size. He doesn't see anything scary about him, because he knows who he's got in his corner, who the whole nation has. They have the living God behind them. So he says, well, why hasn't anybody gone down there? And someone says to him, well, I'll tell you what, the king said he'll give you all sorts of treasures, and you get all sorts of good things. He'll even give you his daughter if you go down and fight him. He said, this is ridiculous. David, why hasn't somebody gone down? Why wouldn't somebody go down and just kill the guy? If you get all that, anybody could do it. So he saw it, and this is the thing that I think we should take to heart. In David's mind, he's thinking anybody could do this. Anybody here. It wouldn't, if a girl walked in bringing food and stuff, she could go down there and kill this guy, because you have the living God behind you. So when David came there, he was not planning to come and kill a giant, but once he got there, he said, I might as well do this. Why would I not? It's like ridiculous to him. Why would I not just go down and kill him and take all these treasures that the king wants? So he hadn't planned to come and kill the giant, but he said, no problem, I'll just do it. So he's got nothing really to fight with. But it's like, and I wish, and hopefully we all can get to this point where you just say to yourself, it is not a problem. There's nothing in this world that is a problem for me if God is behind me. So this young man who has really no skills as as a soldier, he's planning to go down and fight him. And at first, he's not sure of how he's going to kill him. He just knows he's going to. So they say, okay, put on some armor if you're really going to do this, and you must be crazy. But I think David's starting to, his whole cause is starting to become clear to them, that he's starting to convince people that maybe he could actually do that. One other thing I want to note is that his oldest brother, it says Eliab, was angry with David because he thought he came there for evil purposes, maybe to watch him battle and be killed or something, I don't know. But David's only thought was, if anybody goes down there and fights this guy, they'll win. So why doesn't somebody do it? Just a warning to all of us. Whenever we see a young brother with enthusiasm or whatever for something, it's not good to try to dissuade them and think that they are doing evil or whatever. I think it's good to back somebody with enthusiasm like that, with faith like that. Even though as we get older, we get more cautious, I think. And a lot of times we would tend to be the ones that would restrain a young person like this. But Saul eventually gives in, and he says, okay, if you're going to fight him, then take my equipment down there with you. And so David is going to. He's going to try that on. And he says, this isn't going to work. So how is he going to kill Goliath? Well, he has his sling with him. It's not really a weapon of war, although it obviously could be. But you don't think of that. It's almost like a toy or something. David didn't use it as a toy. He probably used it as a shepherd. You can get up high speeds. He probably tried throwing rocks at animals, and the sling worked better. That he could really scare animals away with a sling and really put them out of commission. So he's used to using that. But it is not a weapon that people take to battle for the most part. But he's got that with him. And again, he's thinking, it doesn't matter what I take down there. I'm going to win this battle. It just doesn't matter. I was thinking, if I was David and I was so faithful to do that, what would I use as a weapon? I thought I might use a tennis racket because that's what I was best with. I could hit a serve pretty hard. And if I had a rock and I hit it with a tennis racket, I think I could hit it over 100 miles an hour and hit Goliath right in the head. Not because I was a good server, but because God would just direct it right into his head. Or I thought I'd take a golf club down there and hit a golf ball right at him. Something. Whatever I decided I was good at, it didn't matter. Or you could take a baseball bat down there and hit a golf ball with that, and it would have hit him right in the head. So I think that's what David was thinking, that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who goes down there. It doesn't matter what they use. This guy's dead. Why are you so cautious that you won't go down there and take advantage of this? This guy's a dead man. And you could be the hero and do nothing pretty much. What kind of faith is that? It's exceptional. So So I asked myself, was David uniquely qualified to do this job? Well, in some ways he was, because he's the only one that had that much faith. But as far as skills go, anybody could have done it. All you had to do was step out and trust God in faith. So seriously, any of us could have done the same thing once we realized that it was God's will that this man be struck down. So was he uniquely qualified? Yes and no, I guess is the answer to that. Yes, because he did reflect on God's word all the time. He understood that God was a real God and that he would take care of those who loved him. Okay, so David walks down into the valley, and I think last week in the adult class we were talking about atonement, and Chuck was saying that is like filling in the gap, and that's what David's doing right here. There's a big gap between the armies, and there's a big gap of the people's faith and how they're going to win this battle. And David steps into that gap and says, okay, we are going to win this battle. So essentially, I would say he's atoning for the people's lack of faith, that he's filling in the gap there. And he's going to propel the people to victory through his faith. So that's what happens. We know the rest of the story, that David goes and he picks out 5 stones once he decides he's going to use his sling as his weapon of choice. And he picks out 5 stones, and again, you can make something of that if you want. I'm not sure if there is anything to make of it, but maybe he just went down to the river and he saw 5 stones just like he needed sitting right there. And it once again confirmed his faith in God, that he said, these are perfect. This is just what I need. And people ask, why 5? And there are many answers to that. We know that Goliath had 4 relatives, and maybe David was thinking 1 for each one of them. If Goliath goes down, maybe they'll send 3 more out there, or 4 more. And he's got 1 for each of them. Maybe it's just he saw 5 stones and picked those 5 stones up and put them in his pouch. But whatever, he goes down and he faces off with Goliath. And I'm sure Goliath, as he saw him walk out of the crowd, was wondering what was happening. He probably thought David was sent out to deliver a message. And, he says, what are you doing out here? And he says, I'm going to kill you for your big mouth and all the slanderous things you said. And Goliath, he must have just laughed to himself, This is what you came up with? This is what Israel came up with? They sent this boy out here? And what did David have going for him? It says he had beautiful eyes, and he was of ruddy complexion. Not much of a warrior type, I say, oh, he's got beautiful eyes. I better back off here a little bit. No, so he's standing there, and Goliath says, that's all right. I'm going to rip you limb from limb. If this is, your idea of a joke, well, it's not going to be so funny. And David, of course, stands firm, and he says, you cannot defy the living God and expect to keep your life. So he does. We know he just swings the rock around the smooth stone, and it lands right in his forehead, and he goes down. The giant goes down. We don't know if that killed him, but certainly having his head removed killed him, which David did. He rushes over there after Goliath goes down, and excuse me, he cuts off his head, and that's the end of Goliath. And what a bad day for him. You know, after 40 days of marching out there, being so proud and cocky and thinking, this is the best they can do, and now he's dead. Just like David said in the Psalm. You know, the cedar tree fell, and he was no more. I passed by, and I couldn't find him. And so you can almost imagine that both sides are still for a moment as they watch this take place, not exactly figuring out what's happening. Like, I was thinking just like if I was out there with my tennis racket and served a rock into Goliath's head, everybody would be looking saying, what's he doing? And then all of a sudden, you know, the giant's dead. And that caused a great, again, commotion as all the people rushed then. That valley seemed like nothing to them, and they rushed across and chased the Philistines away. And not that they never battled them again, but that was pretty much the end of the Philistines for that time. So what a great story that is. I always like to think about it. And again, I don't think David, reflected back on that and told his children, the great deed that he performed. I'm sure he said, I couldn't have done it without God's help. And it was all God. It was all God in this story. You can't just go down unprotected with I wouldn't say a wimpy weapon like a sling, but it was certainly not a weapon of war that most people would choose. But he went down there. He had no armor on. He was just dressed like average day's work type thing, and he slew a soldier, a warrior that looked like he was unbeatable, invincible. And he did it easily, and that was because of God's help. In Matthew 17, verse 20, the disciples are talking about how they could not heal a boy that appeared to have epilepsy or something like that. And they asked him why they could not. And he said it in verse 20, because of your little faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible to you. Now, do you really believe that? Like David believed that. He could have said, I'm going to go down into that valley and I'm going to ask that mountain to move from this right over to Israel's side where they can defeat them. He could have said that, and God would have done it for him. He would have moved the whole mountain. I think that's always good for us to think about things like that. Slaying a giant is easy compared to some of the things people face, but God is willing to do that for any of those who are faithful to him. So when we consider our Savior, Jesus, you got to ask yourself, well, was he uniquely qualified? Well, of course he was. We couldn't step out like he stepped out. We couldn't say, I could do the same thing as Jesus because, again, he was uniquely qualified. But he does say one interesting thing, and again, a familiar passage in Mark 10. This is when the rich young man comes to him and he says, I have kept these commandments which you told me. It says in verse 21, Jesus looking upon him, loved him and said to him, you lack one thing. Go sell what you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me. At that saying, his countenance fell, and he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. And I think other versions add the take up your cross and follow me. So once Jesus has rushed out and defeated this giant, this sinful flesh, which plagues all of us, he says, I want you to follow me in that regard and take up your cross, because now you can do it too. You can take up your cross and follow me. You can do the same thing. Now anybody can do it. Anybody can defeat sin because of what Jesus did. All you have to do is step out and do it. Be a man of faith, a woman of faith, and say, I can do this. I can defeat sin in my life. Because you've seen it happen. You've seen it in our Master Jesus, who just went out and did it. So he says to all of us, you can do the same thing. And it might be in your head, I couldn't bear a cross. I couldn't hang on a cross like he did, but you can. You won't be asked probably to do that, but you could do it. If you were asked, you could do anything. And I think that was David's attitude, that he could do anything. And that giant was a small thing for him. We knew what was a big thing for him. Later on in his life, he did have trouble with sin and sinning with Bathsheba. That was a giant he didn't confront properly. And he was wounded by that one. But David was a faithful man, and he did say, of course you can do it. Of course I can do it. So that's the lesson this morning. And again, I was thinking about what David's reflections would be in Psalm 37, he reflects about the wicked and the righteous, and he said the righteous always come out ahead. You might think that the wicked have a little bit of a jump on you, but he says the righteous always come out ahead. And that's what the apostles say. That's what everybody says in their lives. Listen, stick with God. Be faithful, and you will come out ahead. And Paul says in Ephesians 3, and I'm going to close with this, For this reason I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named, that according to the riches of his glory he may grant you to be strengthened with might through the Spirit, his Spirit, in the inner man, and that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have power, and I think this is the amazing thing, the power that you can get through faith. You may have power to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ, which surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. Now to him who by the power at work within us is able to do far more abundantly than all that we ask or think. It's one of my favorite passages. So, all that we ask or think, and maybe I'll ask for some help to get through this, but to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus to all generations forever and ever. Amen.
We'll continue our worship this morning by singing together as a memorial hymn, number 235. Hymn 235.